I attended the wedding of my son, whom I raised as a single father, but my nameplate said, "Low-educated fake dad." The bride's highly educated family burst out laughing, but when I tried to leave, my son said, "Dad, let's go home." The next day, an unbelievable thing happened at their company. Before the chaos, the Grand View ballroom smelled of expensive lilies and arrogance. Crystal chandeliers cast sharp, cold light over the ivory linens. My hands, calloused from 30 years at the factory, felt like lead weights. The Morrisons sat at the head table like royalty, observing a peasant revolt. Charles Morrison adjusted his silk tie and caught my eye. He did not offer a smile. Instead, he leaned over to a local judge and whispered something that triggered a fresh wave of snickering. My table was tucked behind a massive marble column. It felt like a cage. I looked at the heavy cardstock in my hand again. The ink was still fresh. Someone had paid for this specific cruelty. Tyler stood up from his seat near the front. The room went silent as he walked toward my hidden table. He did not look like a groom anymore. He looked like a man waking up from a long, expensive dream. He grabbed the nameplate from my trembling fingers and read the insult aloud. His face turned a dangerous shade of pale. Vanessa tried to grab his arm, but he pulled away. Her mother's satisfied smirk finally faltered as the silence turned jagged and heavy. The exit was a blur of velvet curtains and shocked faces. We stood in the parking lot under a bruised purple sky. My old truck looked like a scar against the row of polished German sedans. Tyler threw his tuxedo jacket into the dirt without a word. He did not look back at the mansion or his crying bride. He climbed into the passenger seat and stared at the dashboard. The smell of expensive cologne filled the cab, clashing with the scent of grease. We sat in my cramped kitchen until the sun crept over the hardware store roof. Tyler had his laptop open, his jaw set in a hard line. He was not grieving. Slept. He was working. He showed me a digital folder titled Morrison Ethics. It contained months of recorded calls and diverted contracts. He had been building a cage while they were building a wedding. I realized then that my son had learned my resilience. He just used much sharper tools to apply it. He had spent years as a software engineer. Slept. Building a quiet fortress of data while they built their empire of lies. At 9 in the morning, the phone rang with a frantic energy. It was the managing partner from the Morrison law firm. She sounded like she was standing in the middle of a house fire. Tyler put the call on speaker and looked at me. The firm was being raided by its own board of directors. Charles was currently being escorted out by security. My son took a slow sip of black coffee and smiled. The fake dad was the only one left standing. The managing partner, Ellen Rodriguez, stood in the center of the marble lobby. Her face was a mask of professional fury. Security guards blocked the elevators while staff whispered behind glass partitions. Tyler grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the conference room. Charles Morrison was there, shouting about his rights and his legacy. He looked at my work boots with pure venom. The air smelled of ozone and expensive cologne. The power had shifted before we even spoke. "Sit down, Jerry," Ellen said, ignoring Charles's outbursts. She slid a thick file across the table. It contained printed copies of the wedding nameplates and Charles's private emails. The fake dad. Insult was highlighted in yellow ink. Charles stopped shouting and turned a sickly shade of gray. He tried to reach for the folder, but Ellen slapped his hand away. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had never seen a man lose his entire life in seconds. Tyler leaned forward, his eyes as cold as flint. He pulled a digital recorder from his pocket and pressed play. Charles's voice filled the room, admitting he'd diverted Tyler's tech contract to a rival firm. It was clear evidence of a felony. Patricia Morrison walked in, her pearls clicking against her silk dress. She looked at me and finally stopped smiling. The silence that followed was heavier than any machine I had ever fixed at the factory. "This is not just a family spat," Ellen whispered. She looked at the board members who had gathered at the door. "This is professional suicide." Charles tried to claim the recording was a fabrication. Tyler just laughed and pointed to the timestamp. It was recorded in the parking lot right after the wedding. Vanessa appeared in the doorway, her eyes red and swollen. She held her wedding ring in her open palm. She was choosing a side. Vanessa dropped the ring on the table. It made a sharp, metallic sound that echoed. "I am resigning from the firm," she said. Her voice did not shake once. She looked at her father like he was a stranger. Patricia reached out to touch her daughter's shoulder, but Vanessa flinched away. The legal dynasty was crumbling into dust. Charles slumped into his chair, his stature shrinking. He was no longer the man who owned the city. "We are offering a full settlement," Ellen stated firmly. She looked at me with genuine respect. The firm wanted to avoid a massive lawsuit. They were prepared to pay for the emotional distress and the lost contracts. I looked at the paperwork, but did not pick up the pen. Money was not what I came for. I wanted them to admit that I was enough. I wanted them to see the man they tried to bury. I stood up and pushed the chair back. The screech of metal on marble felt like a victory. "Keep your money," I said quietly. "I just want my son back." Tyler stood beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder. We walked out of the glass tower without looking back. Behind us, the Morrisons were left with their titles and their silence. In the parking lot, the old truck was waiting. We were finally going home. The gravel crunched under my old truck as we pulled into the driveway. My brother Dean was already waiting on the porch. He looked at us with wide eyes and a clenched jaw. The news of the office raid had traveled fast. Tyler didn't say a word as he climbed out. He walked straight to the garage and grabbed a heavy crowbar. The silence was thick and suffocating. Something was still unresolved in his dark, narrow eyes. "We aren't done yet, Dad," Tyler whispered. He started prying open a floorboard in the back of the garage. I watched him work with a mixture of pride and fear. He pulled out a small, waterproof box. Inside were the original files from the day his mother left. I had forgot I even kept them there. He handed me a faded photograph of a man I didn't recognize. The truth was hiding in the shadows of my past. The man in the photo wore a Morrison law firm pin. My heart stopped. I realized then that Charles hadn't just hated my education. He had a deeper connection to the woman who walked out on us. Tyler pointed to the date on the back of the picture. It was 3 months before the divorce. The Morrisons weren't just snobs. They were the reason I raised my son alone. The betrayal felt like a fresh, jagged cut. He was her lawyer. Wasn't he? I asked. Tyler nodded slowly. Charles had facilitated the disappearance of my ex-wife to protect his own firm's reputation. He had buried the custody battle before it even started. My struggle wasn't just bad luck. It was a calculated legal maneuver. I looked at my calloused hands and felt a cold rage. Every hour of overtime was a debt Charles owed me. I felt the floor drop away. We drove back toward the city as the rain started to fall. The wipers slapped rhythmically against the glass. Tyler gripped the wheel until his knuckles turned white. We weren't going to the firm this time. We were heading to the Morrison estate. The iron gates were open. It was a sign of total surrender or a trap. I checked the waterproof box one last time. The evidence inside was enough to dismantle their entire world. The mansion was dark except for the library. We walked inside without knocking. Charles sat by the fireplace with a glass of amber liquid. He didn't look up when we entered. His arrogance had been replaced by a hollow, haunting stillness. He knew why we were there. The photo was already sitting on the low table between us. He had been waiting for this moment for 30 years. He looked older than the house itself. She wanted to stay, Charles said softly. His voice was like dry leaves on a sidewalk. He looked at me with a strange, flickering pity. I was the one who made her leave. Tyler stepped forward, but I held him back. The real secret wasn't the money or the law. It was the fact that my wife had tried to return. Charles had intercepted her letters for decades. A hidden stack of envelopes sat in the fire. The smell of burning paper filled the library. I lunged toward the hearth, my fingers brushing hot stone. I managed to pull one charred envelope from the edge of the grate. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Angela's looped script from 28 years ago. Charles did not move to stop me. He watched with a vacant stare as the rest of the stack turned to ash. My heart was a drum in a hollow chest. She had reached out. You took her letters, I whispered. The paper was hot against my palm. Tyler stood perfectly still, his shadows long and jagged against the leather-bound books. Charles took a slow sip of his drink. He looked at the fire instead of us. Slept. He admitted he paid her to stay away to avoid a scandal. The Morrison name was more important than a child's father. He thought money could fix the hole she left. The betrayal felt infinite. Tyler walked to the desk and picked up a heavy silver letter opener. He did not point it at Charles. He simply held it, feeling the weight of the metal. Where is she now? He asked. His voice was a low, dangerous hum. Charles finally looked up. He claimed she passed away 5 years ago in a small town upstate. He had even handled the quiet funeral. He thought he was finally safe from the truth. The room felt like it was shrinking around us. I opened the singed envelope in my hand. Inside was a single key and a map coordinates. It was not a letter of apology. It was a location for a safe deposit box. Charles turned pale when he saw the brass key. He did not know she had sent a final message. The power in the room shifted toward that tiny piece of metal. It was his last secret. That belongs to the estate. Charles stammered. He tried to stand, but his legs failed him. He gripped the armchair until his knuckles turned white. Tyler laughed, a harsh and bitter sound. We did not need his permission anymore. We had the key to the vault he had tried to burn. He looked at us with genuine terror. He knew the box contained more than just memories. It was his formal confession. We headed out. The drive to the small town bank took hours. Rain lashed the windshield in sheets. We waited in the cold morning air for the doors to open. The vault was a silent, steel tomb. The bank manager looked at the charred envelope and the key. He led us to a private room in the back. My hands were shaking as I reached for the handle. Tyler placed his hand over mine. We turned the lock together. The box slid out with a heavy metallic groan. Inside was a thick digital drive and a stack of legal documents. There was also a small, blue velvet box. I opened it to find a matching set of gold bands. They were the rings from our wedding that she supposedly threw away. Under the rings was a recent photograph. It showed a woman who looked exactly like Angela, sitting on a porch. She looked very much alive. I stared at the woman in the photograph. Her eyes held the same quiet fire I remembered from decades ago. She was sitting on a porch with peeling white paint and a rusted swing. Behind her, a sign for a local bakery stood out in the sunlight. Charles had lied about the funeral and the death. He had fabricated a tragedy to keep us from looking for the truth. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. She was out there, living a shadow. Tyler took the digital drive and plugged it into his laptop. The screen flickered to life in the dim vault room. A video file appeared, dated only 3 weeks ago. Angela's face filled the frame. She looked tired, but clear-eyed. She spoke directly to the camera about the threats Charles had made against me. He had used his power to ensure she believed we were better off without her. She wasn't just a runaway. She was a victim of his high society gatekeeping. "We have to find this house," Tyler whispered. He traced the bakery sign in the photo with his thumb. I looked at the legal documents in the box. They were signed by Charles, but notarized by a name I didn't recognize. It was a witness protection-style arrangement, funded by the Morrison firm. Charles wasn't just a snob. He was a jailer. He had kept her in a gilded cage of fear. I felt a cold, sharp anger rising in my throat. The bank manager knocked on the door, interrupting the heavy silence. He looked nervous, checking his watch every few seconds. He told us that someone had called to flag the account as stolen. Charles was using his remaining connections to lock the vault down. We had to move fast before the local police arrived. Tyler grabbed the drive and shoved it into his pocket. I took the rings and the photo. We were running out of time and options. We scrambled out the back exit, just as a cruiser pulled into the lot. The rain had turned into a thick mist. I steered the truck through narrow alleyways to avoid the main road. Tyler was already searching for the bakery sign online. He found a match in a small town 3 hours north. It was a place called Oakhaven. We didn't know if she would talk to us. We didn't even know if she still loved us. Why would she stay hidden for so long? I asked. My voice sounded thin and brittle. Tyler didn't answer right away. He was looking at the gold bands in the blue box. He suggested that Charles probably threatened our lives. It was the only way to keep a mother from her child. The Morrisons had treated us like chess pieces for 30 years. They thought our lives were just lines on a ledger. Now, we were finally breaking the board. The truck's engine groaned as we climbed the steep hills toward Oakhaven. The sun started to set, casting long, orange shadows over the road. We reached the town square and saw the bakery from the photo. It was real. The white porch was only 2 blocks away. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I saw a woman standing in the garden, watering some red roses. She turned toward the sound of our engine. She wasn't alone. The woman dropped the green garden hose, and it snaked across the damp grass. She looked at the truck with a mixture of hope and paralyzing terror. Behind her, a man stepped out of the shadows of the porch. He was wearing a dark suit that looked out of place in this quiet, rural town. He placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. But it did not look like an act of affection. It looked like a claim of ownership. Tyler killed the engine. The sudden silence was louder than the machinery. We stepped out into the humid evening air. Angela's face had aged, but the bone structure remained a map of our shared youth. She tried to speak, but the man in the suit squeezed her shoulder tighter. I recognized him now. He was the same young woman's brother from the wedding, Preston Morrison. He was the family cleaner sent to manage the loose ends Charles had left behind. Preston did not look surprised to see us. He looked prepared. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek, black phone. "You should have stayed at the factory, Jerry," Preston said with a thin, metallic smile. He did not look at Tyler. He kept his gaze fixed on me, as if I were a broken machine he could easily discard. He explained that Angela was under a private legal conservatorship. The Morrisons owned her voice, her home, and her history. Every penny she spent came from a trust they controlled. If we interfered, they would trigger a clause that would leave her homeless and penniless within the hour. The trap was perfectly set. Tyler walked toward the porch with his hands open and empty. He did not look at Preston. He looked only at the woman who had been a ghost for 28 years. He told her about the wedding and the nameplate. He told her about the digital drive and the key from the vault. Angela's eyes filled with tears, but she did not move. She was a bird caught in a cage of fine print and threats. Preston stepped in front of her, blocking Tyler's path. The air felt heavy and charged. "I have the recordings of the bribery," Tyler said, his voice dropping to a low growl. Preston laughed and told him that recordings were easily suppressed in their world. He reminded us that the Morrisons had judges on payroll and media outlets on speed dial. We were just two men in a rusted truck trying to fight a mountain of gold. He offered us a deal. If we left now and surrendered the drive, they would increase Angela's allowance. If we stayed, everyone would lose. I felt my resolve begin to flicker. Angela finally broke her silence. Her voice was scratchy, like it had not been used for anything important in a decade. She told us she had never stopped writing the letters. She confirmed that Charles had visited her every year to show her photos of Tyler, but only to remind her of what she would lose if she returned. He had convinced her that I hated her. He had convinced her that Tyler was better off as an orphan of a dead mother. The level of psychological cruelty was breathtaking. Preston grew impatient and tapped his watch. He told us the local sheriff was 3 minutes away. He had reported a carjacking to ensure we were stopped before we could leave the county line. Tyler pulled out his own phone and showed Preston the screen. He wasn't playing a recording. He was streaming live to the firm's entire internal server. The board members, the associates, and the clients were all watching this confrontation in real time. The digital drive had been a distraction. The real weapon was the live broadcast. The color drained from Preston's face as he realized his career was evaporating. Every word he had said about bribes and suppressed evidence was now public record. He dropped his phone on the porch boards. He backed away from Angela, as if she had suddenly turned into a live wire. The authority he carried was gone. He was just a small man in an expensive suit. Angela took a step toward us, her hand reaching out into the twilight. She was finally free from the Morrison shadow. We heard the distant wail of sirens approaching from the north. Tyler grabbed Angela's hand and pulled her toward the truck. We didn't have time for a reunion or an explanation. We had to get past the county line before the Morrisons could mobilize their local allies. I shifted the truck into gear as the first blue lights appeared in the rearview mirror. Angela sat between us, clutching the old wedding rings. She looked at me and whispered a name I hadn't heard in years. Then, she pointed to the woods. I drove the truck onto the dirt logging road as the sirens wailed closer. The tires spun on loose gravel, spitting mud against the undercarriage. Angela pointed toward an old covered bridge, hidden by overgrown pines. She knew these backroads because she had planned her escape 1,000 times. Tyler checked his phone and saw the live stream was still climbing in views. The Morrison reputation was bleeding out in real time. We reached the bridge and killed the lights. The forest was an ink, black wall of silence. The sheriff's cruiser roared past, the entrance of our trail without slowing down. We held our breath as the blue and red lights faded into the mist. Angela slumped against the seat, her hands still shaking as she held the gold rings. She looked at me in the dim glow of the dashboard. "Charles has a tracker on my car," she whispered. "He knows exactly where I am every second." I realized then that Preston hadn't been waiting by chance. He was part of a digital leash. Tyler grabbed a handheld scanner from his tool bag. He began sweeping the interior of the truck for any foreign signals. We had to be clean before we hit the highway. He found a small magnetic device, tucked under the passenger seat. It was a high-end GPS unit, with a Morrison firm logo etched into the plastic. He smashed it with a heavy wrench. The physical destruction felt like a small, necessary victory. We were finally off the grid. The air in the cab felt lighter. We drove through the night, crossing 3 county lines before stopping at a truck stop. The neon sign buzzed with a tired, yellow hum. I watched Tyler buy 3 burner phones and a map. He was thinking like a man who had been hunted his whole life. Angela stepped out to get some air. She stood by the fuel pumps, looking up at the moon. For the first time, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. She looked like a woman who finally owned her shadow. Tyler returned with the news that the Morrison firm was in total lockdown. Ellen Rodriguez had called an emergency vote to remove Charles as senior partner. The board was using the live stream as legal grounds for immediate termination. Vanessa had already moved her belongings out of the estate. The family was fracturing into jagged, irreparable pieces. But there was a new complication on the screen. Charles had filed a missing person report for Angela. He was claiming we had kidnapped her at gunpoint. The stakes shifted. "He will use the police to kill us," Angela said. Her voice was steady now, sharpened by decades of suppressed rage. She told us about a safe house in Vermont that Charles used for offshore accounts. It was filled with physical evidence of his money laundering. If we could reach it, we could bury him forever. It was a 6-hour drive through the mountains. We were no longer just running from a nameplate. We were chasing the killing blow. I shifted into gear again. The mountain pass was steep and slick with morning dew. The truck's engine groaned as it fought the incline. I watched the fuel gauge drop with every mile. We were being followed by a black sedan with tinted windows. It didn't have police markings. It stayed exactly 3 car lengths behind us, matching our speed perfectly. Tyler pulled his laptop out again. He was trying to bypass the security cameras on the Vermont property. The black car suddenly accelerated, ramming our rear bumper. I gripped the wheel as the truck fishtailed near a sharp drop. The metal groaned as the sedan hit us again. Tyler braced himself against the door. "They don't want the evidence," he shouted over the wind. "They just want us off the road." I slammed on the brakes, and the sedan swerved to avoid us. It was Preston. He looked manic behind the wheel, his tie undone and his hair messy. He had nothing left to lose. He was willing to die to protect the lie. I steered the truck into a narrow gap between 2 boulders. The sedan was too wide to follow. We heard the sound of crunching fiberglass as Preston hit the rocks. We didn't stop to check on him. The safe house was only a mile away at the end of a private road. It was a modern structure of glass and steel. It looked like a fortress of greed. Tyler jumped out before I fully stopped. He ran toward the keypad with a series of codes. The door clicked open with a soft, electronic chime. Inside, the walls were lined with rows of black servers. This was the true heart of the Morrison empire. It was a digital vault of every bribe and every silenced witness. Tyler started the download while Angela searched the physical files. I stood by the window, watching the road for Preston or the police. I found a small folder on the desk with my name on it. Inside was a check for $10 million. It was dated yesterday. I stared at the check for $10 million. The paper felt oily against my skin. It was the price of my silence and my son's future. Charles had signed it with a steady hand, a final bribe to bury the truth. I realized then that he didn't just want us gone. He wanted us bought. Tyler looked over my shoulder and laughed a jagged, hollow sound. He didn't see a fortune. He saw a confession. I tore the paper in half. The server fans hummed like a swarm of angry hornets. Tyler's fingers flew across the keyboard as the progress bar crawled toward completion. Outside, the headlights of a second car swept across the glass facade. It wasn't Preston this time. Two men in tactical gear stepped out, carrying heavy battering rams. These were not police officers. They were private security hired to scrub the site clean. The Morrison family was finally going to war. We were trapped in a cage of glass. They are going to breach the back door, Angela whispered. She pointed toward the kitchen where the shadows were moving. I grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall. My hands were steady for the first time in years. I wasn't just a maintenance worker anymore. I was a father protecting his own. Tyler shouted that the download was at 90%. He needed 2 more minutes. The first blow struck the steel frame with a deafening, metallic crack. The glass shattered in a sparkling rain of shards. One man lunged through the opening, but I swung the heavy canister with everything I had. The impact was dull and final. He slumped against the island as his partner hesitated. Tyler pulled the drive and shoved it into his boot. We scrambled toward the basement stairs as the air filled with the smell of pepper spray. The Morrison legacy was fighting for its life. We were just fighting for ours. We reached the utility room and found a narrow laundry chute. It led directly to the garage where the truck was idling. Angela went first, disappearing into the dark. I looked back one last time at the server room. The tactical team was already smashing the hard drives. They thought they had won by destroying the physical evidence. They didn't know Tyler had mirrored the entire server to a public cloud. The truth was already flying across the global internet. The garage door groaned open as we piled into the cab. I floored the accelerator, smashing through the wooden gate. We didn't look back at the glass fortress. Behind us, the lights of the city were starting to flicker. Tyler's phone began to vibrate with thousands of notifications. The Morrison firm was trending on every news site in the country. We were finally free, but a new car appeared in the rearview mirror. It was Vanessa. And she was alone. She flashed her lights, signaling a peace offering in the wake of her father's collapse.